Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to members of the committee, thank you for that welcome today, and thank you for honoring Senator Wallace. General Berry, those were great words that you shared today. And first, let me extend congratulations to each of those that won re-election in this last session. And I also want to congratulate my successor, Governor-elect Sarah Sanders. I met with my successor yesterday, and we have coordinated what I expect to be an excellent transition from one administration to the next. It is an honor to appear before this General Assembly for my last time. We have done a lot together over the last 8 years. We have lowered taxes, created more efficient state government with a 14% reduction in the number of state employees. We have invested in education, funded highways, and set aside over $2.5 billion in reserve accounts. Today, I can say with confidence that the state has never been in better financial condition. I also want to recognize my cabinet. I noticed that they came and are behind me either to back up Secretary Walther when he answers questions or to back me up today. But I'm grateful for each of my cabinet for helping have the state successful over the last 8 years and to work closely with the members of this assembly, and I salute them. I also will be joined by Secretary Larry Walther and Budget Director Robert Breck, who will answer questions following my overview of the budget. Let me present the highlights of the executive recommendations on the budget. First of all, as I mentioned, there is $2.78 billion in reserve funding. I believe we have a slide to that effect. And you can see from the slide that you have $1.2 billion in the catastrophic reserve fund. You have a general revenue allotment reserve fund of $1.3 billion, a restricted reserve fund, and a small amount left in rainy day fund that likely will be spent. But you can see the extraordinary reserves that we have built up together here in the state, totaling $2.78 billion. The second highlight I will mention in the budget that the executive branch has submitted is that it includes a $550 million increase in public school funding over the next 2 years. This is from general revenue. $200 million in FY24 and $350 million in FY25. This allows the next administration and the General Assembly maximum flexibility in terms of raising teacher salaries and raising the outcomes for education in the state. The increase would be the largest increase in education spending in well over a decade, and I believe that it is necessary for us to be competitive. It is necessary in light of our financial condition, and it is important in light of what is needed in terms of student growth and progress. The budget also includes $13.3 million increase for the Division of Children and Family Services to improve our care for foster children and foster families. This money will allow an increase in the stipend for foster parents for the first time since 2009. It will also cover stipends for the first time for provisional foster parents such as grandparents, siblings, and other kin who provide a safe place for the foster children. This is important to do for the welfare of our children in the state. The budget also increases state police budget by $1.5 million for each of the next 2 years. This obviously is needed for increased operational expenses, and there will also be $3 million allocated for state police vehicles that will become a part of the budget rather than relying upon one-time funding. There is an increase in the proposed budget for the Department of Corrections of $5.4 million that covers increase in medical costs, and it'll also support their work in trying to increase bed capacity. and that will be an increase of $7.3 million for the second year of the biennium. There will be an increase for community corrections of $3.5 million for each of the next 2 years that cover additional drug courts, many of which you have advocated for, and it will also cover the intensive supervision initiative that puts additional parole officers to support those high-risk parolees that come out that are trying to get a second chance in life but are struggling with different issues. It will provide for an increase of $4.2 million to the Department of the Military. This will cover increased maintenance of armory facilities, which is important for recruitment and retention purposes, and for strengthening the support of at-risk youth that the National Guard serves. There'll be additional changes in the Division of Youth Services budget, which will provide for an increase of the Division of Youth Services to better manage and provide treatment for youth with more complex needs, including those with a history of more violent behavior. The additional funding will support the opening of a 20-bed residential facility for high-risk offenders, high-risk youth offenders. And the budget also includes an expected price increase in the contract for management of these facilities. This is an important part of the budget because we have some challenges with youth offenders. This allocates more resources for them, and that's a tremendous responsibility for the state, both in terms of public safety, but also in terms of doing the right thing with youth that come from troubled background that are struggling in life. Even with these investments in public safety, health, and education, I'm submitting a budget that includes a surplus of $255 million in FY24 and a surplus of $309 billion in FY25. These are budgeted surpluses. And I would add again that we are currently in a fiscal year and we are anticipating a $600 million surplus through the course of this year. The budget growth rate in year-over-year terms is 5.2% in FY24 and down to 2.8% in FY25. Considering inflation is at over 8% across the nation and in Arkansas, limiting the growth to 5% reflects conservative budgeting during these challenging times. In terms of the Medicaid budget, we are not increasing the funding until the second year, but I remind everyone that we have over $600 million in our Medicaid trust fund, which is the largest amount in my memory for that trust fund. The trust fund has a larger balance now than 8 years ago. It is in good position, and so we're not allocating increase the Medicaid budget or drawdown from that now. There is expected to be a drawdown from that over the course of the next couple of years, but we have $600 million that's set aside in that trust fund. The budget includes funding for a new pay plan, which could be $41 million. This is included in the performance funding line on the budget, and it doesn't mean it has to be spent. Some of that can be absorbed, but it allows $41 million for a new pay plan. This will allow room for a new pay plan to be considered and adopted by the next administration and the General Assembly that will help us to recruit and retain quality state employees who serve the people of this state so well. Lastly, on higher education, the budget reflects increases to cover the productivity funding model and an increase for UAPB to cover the cost of the federal match required for land-grant institutions. That concludes my summary of some of the highlights of the budget. I know that you'll look at it very closely, and Secretary Walther and Director Robert Breck will be here to answer questions on it. The budget is now in your hands and in the hands of the next administration. I know that you'll work to adopt a final budget that improves education, public safety, and the services of state government. It has been the highest honor of my public life to serve as governor of this state. Scripture says that iron sharpeneth iron. I think about that in terms of the General Assembly. And when iron strikes iron, what do you get? You get a few sparks. But you also get a sharper outcome. And I believe that our relationship has reflected that scriptural principle that you have made me a better governor, you have made our outcomes better, and it has been a high honor and privilege to serve with you over the last years. And I'll be praying for you, and God bless you.